With the recent release of Super Mario Wonder, a new Super Mario Maker 3 on the next Nintendo console seems more likely than ever, and one of the most sought after questions that stem from this potential Mario Maker 3 is what game styles will it include? That's why I'm here. I'll be exploring just how likely a Mario Wonder game style is to make it into Mario Maker 3, the criteria needed for it to become a style, and why your favorite Mario games just might not make it in. Oh, and by the way, if you end up enjoying this video, consider subscribing to the channel to help it grow, and I'd also really appreciate it. But with that said, let's find out if a Super Mario Wonder style can make it into Mario Maker 3. To start off, why exactly do I think a Super Mario Wonder style can make it into Mario Maker 3? Have you seen the game? It's safe to say that Mario Wonder would fit in pretty well with the other game styles, but let me give a more proper explanation. You see, while the game is part of the 2D Mario series, its uniqueness from the other games is what makes it stand out. And when you look at the 5 game styles we currently have in Mario Maker 2, what traits do they all share? It's their uniqueness from each other. From Super Mario Bros. 1's 8-bit look to 3's current play setting, Mario World's more ancient look, New Soup's improved graphics, and 3D World's, well, 3D look. And it's not just the look of the characters. Everything from the setting of each theme, to the music that plays in them, and even the controls the characters have in each style lead to a lot of different experiences based on which one you're using. All of them look and feel very distinct from one another, and in all honesty, I think that's one of the criteria the developers at Nintendo are looking for when deciding what game style to implement into the game. That would explain why games like New Super Mario Bros. DS, 2, and Wii never made it into the game, because they would feel too similar to already existing game styles in Mario Maker. So, for now, let's assume that one of the criteria Nintendo is looking for when deciding what game styles to add is uniqueness. That would mean Super Mario Wonder fulfills that condition, with it being the 2D game that has the most diverse looking settings, movesets, music, and looks. But that still leaves some more elements on the table, one of them being the 3D games. Those games are pretty unique, so surely they fulfill that condition, right? But to see why some of your favorite 3D games might not make it into Mario Maker 3, we need to look at Super Mario 3D World, and why it was added to Mario Maker when a game like Odyssey released just a year prior, and somehow didn't. I mean, there had to be something that Nintendo saw in 3D World that made them want to add it in, right? Well, that's where the second condition makes its way in. The game must have a clearly defined start and end to its levels. Now, that might not have been what you expected to hear, but let me explain. Technically, yes, every Mario game has a beginning and end to their levels, but in some cases, that can be up to the player, not the game itself, to decide what exactly the ending is. Let's take a look at Super Mario Odyssey, for example. In that game, you travel through different kingdoms and explore them to find power moons scattered all over the place. Pretty simple, right? Except it doesn't end there. The Metro Kingdom is one of the game's many locations you can go through. When you arrive, the city is under the control of Bowser and his Robo Wiggler. So surely the end goal here is to defeat the Robo Wiggler, right? Well, yes, you do need to defeat the Wiggler, but it doesn't end there. You still need to collect more power moons to continue your pursuit of Bowser. So, is that the real goal? No. Again, because you also need to find and gather 4 musicians to play in the New Dog City Festival. So surely that's the real ending. But what if I told you, you don't need to get those 4 musicians. Collecting enough power moons throughout the kingdom will leave you with enough to continue chasing Bowser without ever having done the festival. That's what I mean by the ending here is up to the player. And that's where games like Super Mario Odyssey and 3D World begin to have their differences. A lot of people know 3D World as a 2D Mario but in 3D game because of the layout of its levels. But that's not the only reason it's called that. 3D World doesn't have multiple endings in its levels. You start in an area, and as you go through the level, you'll eventually come across the flagpole, which marks the end of the level. Just like any 2D Mario game, 3D World has collectibles as well, being its green stars. But you collect those as you go through the level, almost like a sort of side quest rather than an end goal. Because 3D World has a flagpole, aka clear end, the level is almost subconsciously guiding you through it, whereas in Odyssey, the player guides themselves, and they decide what the end is. So going back to my criteria, The game must have a clearly defined beginning and end to its levels. You can probably now see how Odyssey didn't fulfill that criterion, but 3D World did. That also explains why games like Super Mario Sunshine, 64, and Galaxy also never made it into Mario Maker 2, as they all share that no true ending trait in each of their games. 3D World and 3D Land are the only two games that are quite literally 2D Mario games, but in 3D. But I guess 3D World looked better than Land, so they brought that game into Mario Maker. And in case it wasn't already obvious enough, Mario Wonder does fulfill that condition, with it having a flagpole ending, so that's another point for it in terms of making it into Mario Maker 3. I also want to mention that although I did say Mario Galaxy couldn't make it into Mario Maker 3 because it doesn't have a clear ending, I wouldn't be surprised if it did because of its linear/2D gameplay and power-ups. But we'll talk about the power-ups a little later on. First, we need to go on to my next point, which isn't necessarily a criterion, but more so a difference that I've noticed between 3D World and the other 3D games. The gimmicks. See, Odyssey, Sunshine, and Galaxy all had a gimmick fundamental to the player's experience. Odyssey has Cappy, Sunshine has Flood, and Galaxy has the Spin. Super Mario 64 didn't really have one clear gimmick like the others, but you could argue that Mario's movement itself was a gimmick with how advanced it was compared to the previous Mario games. 3D World, on the other hand, doesn't have any of these. It just uses power-ups to enhance the gameplay in each level. Again, like in any other 2D Mario game. Lastly, before we move on to the next criterion, keep in mind this is just pure speculation. Despite Mario Odyssey not having a clear ending, they could just easily implement the Power Moon into the game and have the player collect that in order to finish a level. But this is Nintendo we're talking about. They do a lot of weird stuff. So if we want to try and see if these games can make it into Mario Maker 3, we need to think like them. But moving on from that, we have our third criterion, and it's based all around power-ups. Told you we'd talk about the power-ups later on. In Mario Maker, every game style has what I like to call base power-ups. These consist of power-ups that every game style needs to have regardless of what it is. And those power-ups are the Mushroom, Fire Flower, and Superstar. Pretty simple. Next, we move into what I like to call the unique power-ups. They consist of items only accessible in that one game style, like the Super Ball, Frog Suit, or Bullet Bill Mask. And in that section, there are two subsections, the flying power-ups like the Tanuki Leaf, Pea Balloon, and Super Acorn, and the mount power-ups like the Shoe Goomba, Yoshi, and Koopa Troopa Car. These are items that'll oftentimes be the deciding factor between which game style the player wants to use, and without them, all the game styles would feel pretty similar. Just imagine a Mario Maker 2 where the only power-ups you had access to were the Mushroom, Fire Flower, and Superstar. I mean, some of the best designed levels in Mario Maker are centered around these style-exclusive power-ups, and none of them would exist had it not been for them. So now, let's look at a game like Super Mario Sunshine, where there are no power-ups, only Mario and Flood. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying using Flood would not be fun, because trust me, it would. But with it being the only item you could use, it would eventually just stop being fun. I know that might sound really basic, but there's really no other way to put it. Or maybe I'm just crazy and you guys could play a Super Mario Sunshine style for days on end and be content. But even if that was the case, it would just feel weird not to have those style exclusive power-ups. This also applies to Mario Odyssey and 64. Fortunately, Mario Wonder has 3 new power-ups that it introduces to the Mario series, being the Drill Mushroom, Bubble Flower, and Elephant Mushroom. The same can be said for Galaxy as it has the Bee Mushroom, Ice Flower, and Cloud Flower. So hey, maybe it will make it into Mario Maker 3. But now, let's move on to the final and most ridiculous criterion, the playable characters. Now, the reason I'm calling this ridiculous is because it doesn't really make any sense at all, but I wanted to mention it anyway, so here we are. To keep it simple, all of the game styles we have in Mario Maker originally had 4 playable characters in their respective game. We don't talk about Super Mario Bros. 1. Those characters being Mario, obviously, Luigi, Toad, and Toadette. Or at least some female character like in 3D World and Mario Bros. 3 case, Peach. So does this mean that the game also needs to have multiple characters in order to become a game style? Meaning that a game like Odyssey wouldn't fulfill that condition? Well, no. See, Odyssey may not have 4 playable characters, but it does have the models for Luigi, Toad, and Toadette, as all three of them are seen throughout the game, interacting with Mario. So they could always just use them as a guide to create those same characters in Mario Maker. On top of that, a game like Super Mario Bros. 1 never had Toad or Princess Toadstool as playable characters, yet they were added, though the princess was replaced with Toadette instead, meaning creating new sprites for Mario Maker specifically is not something that's new to them. Only difference is that the amount of time required to make the sprites for those characters would be much longer as opposed to making 8-bit ones. But let's be honest, that probably won't be much of an issue. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I don't see Mario Odyssey becoming a game style because it fails the conditions I mentioned earlier. But let's say for a second it did, and the playable characters were the deciding factor that stopped it from becoming a game style, it would feel pretty stupid and lazy, which is why the criterion is more so on the ridiculous side, as I mentioned earlier. Moving past that though, Mario Wonder with his total of 12 playable characters would fall under that criterion. Maybe we'd even see Daisy and Peach become playable characters if that was the case. I mean, imagine beating a super world as Peach and seeing that little end cutscene of Peach but rescuing Peach. Now that's something I want to see. I do genuinely think that some of the things I mentioned here are factors that the developers of Mario Maker take into consideration, which is why, as of right now, I strongly believe we could see a Super Mario Wonder style in Super Mario Maker 3. At the same time though, I could just be completely wrong and we don't get a Super Mario Wonder style, but instead, a Paper Mario and Super Mario Bros. Wii game style. But you guys can let me know your thoughts about all of this in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, you can check the one that's hopefully on screen right now, where I tell the story of how I recreated Bowser Castle 3 in Mario Maker 2. It's a good one, trust me. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe of course. But, until next time, bye!